Welcome to Celebrating Canada. My name's Jeremy Corrigan, and for the next 30 minutes, we are going to celebrate everything Canadian on Canada's 155th birthday. Now, when you think about Canadian symbols, the first thing that might come to mind is the Canadian maple leaf. But did you know there is another major Canadian symbol? That being the Canadian tartan.
When one thinks of a tartan, they think Scotland, and rightfully so. The earliest record of a tartan in Scotland can be dated back to the 3rd or 4th century AD, and the tartan has a checkered past.
And then from 1745 until 1782, there was the Dress Act passed by the British Parliament, which we won't call it a ban, but we'll say if you were caught wearing it, you were in a lot of trouble.
More than 200 years later, an immigrant from Eastern Europe designed a tartan specific to Canada in anticipation of the centennial in 1967.
David Weiser, who was a textile manufacturer for the company Highland Queen, who was a first-generation immigrant, came up with the idea of creating a tartan to represent Canada.
And much like the maple leaf, hockey, and lacrosse, the tartan is an official symbol of this nation.
What's interesting is if you look at the official websites for each jurisdiction and the national website, there's always a section in there that talks about the emblems representing that jurisdiction. And tartan is listed in all of those jurisdictions except for Quebec and Nunavut, including the national website, which lists the maple leaf as its one of its official emblems. And so even though it comes from a Scottish tradition, it is something that we've adopted as Canadians, and it is part of our symbology as a nation.
Though clan tartans are the most well-known, tartans can represent many different things: families, towns, districts, and even provinces. In fact, most provinces and territories in this country have their own tartan. In the case of BC, the tartan is primarily blue and red, representing the Pacific Ocean and the maple leaf.
What I find is really interesting is the connection between the Scottish clan system and the Indigenous Canadian house system. They're very, very similar. We have different symbols, of course, that represent the different things, but there's a lot of similarities between Highland heritage and Indigenous Canadian heritage.
The first Canadian province to adopt a tartan was Nova Scotia in 1963. Cheryl Jan, CKPG News.
Earlier this year, the Rocky Mountain Rangers celebrated their 10-year anniversary here in the city of Prince George. The group has a storied history in the city despite going on a hiatus. But despite that break, the National Infantry sees the Rocky Mountain Rangers and the city of Prince George as an important piece of the military puzzle.
The Rocky Mountain Rangers have been training members of Canada's infantry in Prince George for a long time. But they also weren't.
Rocky Mountain Rangers in 2011 came back to your wonderful city of Prince George. We were invited with open arms. We had a military presence here in the 60s and 70s that left, and now there was an appetite to bring a foreign military presence back to Prince George and the north.
2022 marks the 10th year of boots returning to the ground in PG, producing men and women in uniform for named missions overseas in Afghanistan, Poland, Latvia, and more, including Eric Depineau, who's now part of a storied military legacy.
I think Prince George has a fantastic military legacy. If you look at the VLA, which was the Veterans Land Allocation previously, or Camp Baldy Hughes, all of these different pieces, many of the civic yards are even old military buildings from a previous time. And so there's this really deep history here, including the Rangers some 40 years ago for quite a period.
Since they came back, the Rangers have blown all expectations from the Canadian military, so much so that superiors have begun to take notice. Major General Richard Blanchette didn't want to promise more for Bravo Company, but did say his visit to the city left a major impression of the importance of this regiment for the Canadian infantry.
It is very important. We need to have a footprint in the community that is representative, and to have a unit in one area and having the possibility of extending its footprint to a municipality like Prince George. That's the way you have to conduct business in the world of reserve.
Part of the reason the Rangers have blown away expectations is thanks to relationships they forged with the community, the school district who provided them a home base, and the city, something higher-ups have recognized.
I happened to be on the school board when they first started to think about coming back and using Meadow School. And here we are celebrating 10 years back in Prince George, and it's just so vitally important to have them here.
And so the Ranger story continues. As Bravo Company outgrows their current building and setup, it's hoped the feds will step up and make a well-deserved upgrade happen and add full-time positions to go along with it.
I think the takeaway is really to understand that the reserve complements the regular force. We're here to augment it, and sometimes that means anything from, that primary infantry capacity all the way over to helping in nursing homes out in Quebec as an example. So we serve on behalf of the Government of Canada, and we're proud to do whatever we're called upon.
Caden Fanshaw, CKPG News.
The Robertson screwdriver, walkie-talkies, and instant replays are some things that you may not have known were made right here in Canada. But an important invention was actually made right here in the city of Prince George, that being the Bellows brush cutter.
This massive piece of equipment is the Bellows brush cutter. It was invented in 1929 by Prince George resident William Bellows. He came to the city as a foreman for the Grand Trunk Pacific. His experience in working on railways led him to develop in the region.
But then ended up being a contractor and building many of the streets and roads that we drive on today. The brush cutter was used in some of the development of those roads, but also land around the city, such as the airport.
Bellows is originally from Greece and arrived in Prince George in 1912. He bought a Caterpillar tractor and modified it to fit the brush cutter.
And since the brush cutter was used for so many years, it actually was modified again and again to be mounted onto newer technology. There would have been a motor inside the body of the brush cutter that would have allowed the blade to move up and down. So you can imagine if this was mounted to a tractor and it was going down a hill, you would dig the blade right into the ground. So the driver needed some way to move the blade up and down so there was some flexibility to cover terrain.
The brush cutter was taken to other communities and demonstrated for what it could do.
In the 1930s, right before the market crash, there was actually several demonstrations that we have records of where it was being demonstrated for different government departments. And some of these officials were recounting how the brush cutter cut through trees 10 to 12 inches thick.
Bellows helped build 5 different airports and pushed through the telephone line to Bella Coola.
He invented and was based in Prince George, and he tried to make his equipment feasible to use everywhere, but several conversations actually say, I invented this for the Prince George area, and depending on moisture in the ground, depending on how hilly the terrain is or what kind of soil it is, I would modify my machine. And so he always said, I can't do a cost estimate for you because I based this on Prince George.
If it wasn't for the market crash in the 1930s, the brush cutter had the potential to be used internationally.
And he had lots of interest from lots of parties all over North America and even some in Russia. Unfortunately, after the market crashed, William Bellows lost all of his money and he was left with just his equipment. If that hadn't taken place at that time, there's a fair chance that this could have been the overriding method for making roads and for clearing land in North America.
The only Bellows brush cutter that helped shape the Canadian landscape sits on display at the Central BC Railway and Forestry Museum. Dave Branco, CKPG News.
Coming up next on Celebrating Canada, we look at the return of Canada Day celebrations here in the city of Prince George. More right after the break. Founded in 2015, the legendary Sikh riders have not only made an extreme impact here in the city of Prince George, but one felt across the entire country. Our Jack Clark reports.
The Sikh religion is very prominent in Prince George with 2 different temples in town. And while the religion is hundreds of years old, there's a new group of Sikh bikers making a name for themselves across the country.
We're called the legendary Sikh riders. And we actually established our group in 2015, and we've been writing ever since. A lot of our guys have been established here for a long time, and we've been living in Canada for quite a while. And so it's our time to actually go out there and celebrate our life and also to give back to the community.
Giving back to the community is very important to the legendary Sikh riders, but the group also prioritizes honoring its religion.
For the Sikh, the turban is everything for their faith. So to ride with the turban is a lot of pride for us. And what I've done is I've ridden about 150 to 160 now, 1,000 kilometers on a motorcycle with my turban. So our thing was to go across Canada. The only way I do is I'll do it like a fundraiser. So we did a fundraiser last year, and we got connected with Make-A-Wish Foundation. And they actually were really good with us, and we got connected with them, and we sponsored our ride. Kind of like was dictated or committed to them, for the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
From traveling across the country to helping the people of British Columbia, the legendary Sikh riders are leaving a lasting impact across Canada.
But why it's important, they showed up in their turbans, mostly in full Santa Claus outfits. They're so enthusiastic. They're so much fun. They're so photogenic. They get so involved in the Christmas spirit. And then also one of their members even did an entire crooning version of Elvis Christmas songs at our event one year. So they're very enthusiastic. They're very vibrant. They're very colorful. They're a ton of fun to work with, actually.
The group's generosity is something they've been taught for a long time.
It teaches you it's not about God or you do this will happen. It's all about how to live a life, how to live a clean, good, truthful life. That's what our Guru's teachings are.
The legendary Sikh riders most recently visited Prince George in May for the Vakashi parade and donated a palki to one of the temples. Jack Clark, CKPG News.
Prince George has had the opportunity to host Canada Day celebrations at Lheidli T'Enneh Memorial Park over the years. And after a 2-year hiatus, the party is back on. Randy Marie Adams has the details on Prince George's biggest celebration.
For the past 49 years, the Multicultural Heritage Society of Prince George has been hosting Canada Day celebrations in the park.
A lot of families that are not that well off can come out and enjoy a day really and don't have to put out any money. And the park is, a beautiful venue. You can't ask for a nicer setting.
Lheidli T'Enneh Memorial Park has hosted numerous events over the years, but COVID really put a damper on everything, including the biggest party of the year.
Last year was the first year in 47 years that we had to cancel the event. Our festival caters to 10 to 12,000 people. So it's for us to do anything for 50 people just isn't feasible.
This is Marlise's 30th year hosting the festival.
But I was here when we did the 125th. I was here when we did the Queen's Golden Jubilee and the Diamond Jubilee. So we've had special occasions to celebrate many times, but it's always nice to recognize our own country.
There was concern that it may not happen due to some unforeseen circumstances, but the community wouldn't let that happen, and folks came together to help raise money and get the celebration going. And this year, Kyle Sampson says, will be bigger and better than ever.
I think looking back from the beginning, this event has a long history of the Multicultural Heritage Society in Prince George, 49 years this year I think it is, and 30 years under Marlise's leadership. And what happened to Canada Day in Prince George is kind of resembles what happened to a lot of organizations around the world after the pandemic. Is contacts were lost and connections were lost and just capacity, volunteers, all of those types of things. And so we heard that the society was struggling a little bit to get everything together for Canada Day and was on the verge of having to cancel just by lack of manpower and the sorts.
Honoring the years of celebrations, and at a time we can now finally get together, this year's celebration will mean more than anything to the community.
Happy to say that after a 2-year hiatus, we're tried to resurrect the festival, and we looked for help within the community, and we received it, and I'm happy to report that we will have a festival taking place on July 1st.
A time to gather, meet old friends, and make new ones. A swift reminder that we made it through all of this together. Happy Canada Day.
Next on Celebrating Canada, we shine a spotlight on 5-pin bowling and how it was invented here in Canada. The details right after the break. Bowling has always been one of the more popular sports, but being accessible for everyone, now that's a different story. However, early in the 1900s, a Canadian made it his mission to make the game more accessible for everyone. And as a result, it provided one of the best inventions in our country, 5-pin bowling.
It may come as a surprise to some, but 5-pin bowling is a Canadian invention.
Yes, it is. In 1909, a guy named Thomas Ryan invented 5-pin bowling in Toronto.
The 5-pin game derived from customers' reviews of the 10-pin game, with Ryan fielding complaints that the 10-pin bowling ball was heavy and difficult to play. As a result, he cut the number of pins in half, shaved them down by roughly 25%, and made a ball that just about anyone could hold. It's made for a family-friendly game. However, it turns out Ryan's invention can be deemed far more difficult than the traditional game.
Well, in my experience, since there's not a lot of pins, you have to hit the head pin kind of on the side just to try and make them slide into each other to get a strike. You can actually get the ball through the pins without getting anything, so you can get a 0, which is not fun at all.
And the scoring is also different compared to 10-pin bowling.
Okay, so in 10-pin, it is basically a point for each pin. 5-pin, the head pin's worth 5, the next 2 pins are worth 3, and the corner pins are worth 2. So you get 15 points in a frame. So you can get 12 strikes in a row technically, and a perfect game is 450, while in 10-pin it's only 300. So it's an accomplishment when you get a really high game in 5-pin.
With 10-pin typically being the game of choice for bowling lanes around the globe, it can be surprising for tourists to enter a Canadian lane and discover 5-pin for the first time. But it turns out it's something that we Canadians enjoy educating others on.
Oh, I love it. They'll ask me all sorts of questions when they're talking, and what's this and that, and we also have different letters in 5-pin. I'm not too sure about 10 because I haven't really got a lot of letters, mostly gutters, but it's great. It's sharing knowledge, and knowledge is important.
The game has been celebrated as one of the country's greatest inventions, even making its way on stamps back in 2009, and just 2 years prior was ranked as the country's 4th best invention. If you ask me, that's a strike.
Coming up next on Celebrating Canada, we take a bite into one of Canada's most tasty treats, the donut. The story right after the break. Now, you can't have a Canada Day special without talking about Canadian treats. Our Anthony Correa has more on the unofficial national food of Canada.
Did you know that Canada is the #1 donut consumer in the world, eating over 1 billion donuts annually? A large part of this is due to Tim Hortons, as there is 4,300 locations across Canada. However, in Prince George, there's another donut shop that sells these delicious creations.
Well, Canadians like good food, and especially the wintertime. Hibernation kicks in, and there's nothing nicer than a sweet treat.
Whether it's covered in cinnamon sugar, chocolate icing with sprinkles, or an apple fritter, Canadians love their donuts. Daydream Donuts is one of the many donut shops in Canada. The shop opened up last year in Prince George with the goal of chasing a dream.
My daughter works in a little donut shop out east, and it just kind of made me want to take a shot at a dream again, and my husband suggested that we just go for it. So my son and I and his husband all got together, and here we are.
The process starts early in the morning by making the homemade dough. Once that is ready, the donuts are ready to be deep fried to perfection before heading over to be decorated. Once there, each donut is carefully hand iced with homemade icing and then decorated just right before being displayed behind the glass case.
We wanted to provide a really good quality product that nobody else was doing. So it was a niche that wasn't being matched for an artisanal scratch-made product. So we worked on a couple of different recipes and got some input from people who knew what they were doing, and we developed our own dough. So when you eat a Daydream donut, it doesn't taste like anybody else's.
There are over 5,000 shops that sell these delicious pastries across Canada. However, for Daydream Donuts, picking a location wasn't a problem, as they have found their home right here in Prince George.
Our little city is amazing. It's so supportive of new businesses and the return customers we have. We have regulars now and that come in almost every day and weekly, and it's just an amazing supportive community that we have here.
So with all this creativity and new ideas for donuts flowing every day, and July 1st approaching, the question is, will there be a Canadian donut or Canada Day donut on display?
We get kind of crazy when we decorate. There will probably be several different Canada Day donuts, and we're working on a couple of ideas now. And maple will definitely be featured, because it's Canadian.
The shop will be open today selling their special creations and want to thank the city of Prince George for helping their dream become a reality. Anthony Correa, CKPG News.
There are truly so many great things that are purely Canadian, and we can celebrate today on Canada's 155th birthday. Happy birthday, Canada, and I hope you all have a great Canada Day.